welcome to session number 4 of the IF series. My name is Olya Abasalo. I am a member of the education team and an Olympian, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. We will speak today about the principles and values of clean sport, decision-making, consequences of doping, and speaking up. And again, a big welcome to everyone, and thank you all for saying hello in the chat. I will give a few shout outs in just a second. But before we begin, let's make sure that everyone's aware of the simultaneous translation option that we have available for you today. As you know, our slides are in English, and I will be speaking in English as well, but you can also listen to simultaneous translation in Arabic, Spanish, Russian, French, and Mandarin Chinese. So please do settle into the language channel that you prefer. And while you do that, I will say hi to the first few people that were to write in the chat. So hello to Macau Boxing, to Peru Judo, to Belgium, Romania, Azerbaijan, Russia Golf, Spain Skate, Colombia, Gambia, and China, Hong Kong Boxing. And welcome to everyone else writing in. It's a pleasure to see such an international audience from all the sports that are present today. Just like in previous sessions, we will have poll questions and a lot of moments of reflection this time. So please do take the opportunity to use the chat to also share your feedback and your comments as we ask you questions throughout the session. And you can also answer the anonymous polls. Of course, we have the Q&A always open, so you can send us your questions there. A reminder, this session is being recorded. So you are joining us today from 7 different international federations from the sports of luge, gymnastics, judo, boxing, skateboarding and roller sports, golf, and baseball and softball. So again, welcome to everyone. This is our 4th week of a 5-week course that we're delivering in collaboration with your international federations. And we cover all the compulsory topics as they are outlined in the World Anti-Doping Code and the International Standard for Education. And you can see the schedule again on your screen. As a reminder, of course, the certificates will be sent out very soon after our last session, so please do register with the same email address each time. And let's move on to the agenda. Our topics today are quite complex and best presented through the eyes of the athletes. So today's presentation will have a lot of video testimonials, courtesy of the US Anti-Doping Agency, Leeds Beckett University, and the University of Birmingham in the UK. So with all that in mind, let's take a look at our agenda. We will start with the spirit of sport values and the ideal athlete. We will then present some decision-making influences and what we call moments of vulnerability that can lead to doping. We'll then cover some consequences of doping. And our final agenda item for today is speaking up. And to cover this topic, I will be joined by Dr. Kelsey Erickson. And Kelsey will turn on her camera in just a moment to say hello to you. Kelsey is a director of athlete health, engagement, and experience at USA Cycling. Prior to taking on this role, Kelsey led and supported multiple global anti-doping research projects. One such project focused on developing evidence-based whistleblowing policies and procedures and on underlining the complexity of doping and whistleblowing in sport. So Kelsey, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. So we'll have Kelsey come back for that last part on speaking up. And of course, when Kelsey wraps up, we will be addressing your questions from the Q&A box. Again, a reminder, you can see how many messages are coming in through the chat. So please do write your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat so we can see them. Okay, so these are the objectives on your screen for today's session. and I'll read them out for the purpose of simultaneous translation. So by the end of the session, we hope that you know the values of the spirit of sport and the ideal athlete, that you're able to identify the relationship between the ideal athlete and doping decisions. You understand what can influence decision-making, of course, especially related to doping, and that you know the different consequences of doping. Then we hope that you also understand the importance of speaking up. And finally, that you know where to go if you need to speak to someone or if you have something to report. So without any further delay, let's get started. And we've put up a question here on the screen. You are more than welcome to put your thoughts and your answers to this question in your language of choice into the chat. So what are some of the characteristics and behaviors of the ideal athlete? All of us as members of the global sport community have an obligation to go beyond just knowing the rules and regulations. We need to go further and have a discussion about the concept of anti-doping and why it exists. So this is why we start with this question: what are some of the characteristics and behaviors of the ideal athlete? Again, this is our first interactive part. You should all be familiar with how the sessions work. I can see so many hellos, so don't hesitate to write your answers as well. And you don't have to think too much. You can just write 1 or 2 words. And somebody already wrote role model, so absolutely, that's a good definition. So many of you may be asking how this is related to anti-doping. Well, ethical behavior throughout sport is of course linked directly to behavior of clean athletes. And thank you for writing integrity, humility, fairness, being polite and good, honesty, being responsible, ambitious, and respectful. So thank you. These are definitely great characteristics. And anti-doping policies have been developed to protect these clean values that you've written and those that you can see on the screen. You will see the values in different languages. We've started with English. And many of your responses to what characteristics and behaviors are of the ideal athlete align with some of these sport values. So under the World Anti-Doping Code, these values include health, ethics, fair play, honesty, dedication, commitment, respect for the rules and laws, respect for self and fellow competitors. And perhaps we can skip through the different languages so we can show you all the values in different languages. Community, solidarity, excellence, teamwork, courage. And these values represent ethical behaviors throughout sport, including, but not limited to, of course, competing clean. So let's go through an example of an ideal athlete. So ideal athletes are role models because they demonstrate characteristics and behaviors that align with the spirit of sport values. One example here that we're going to start off with is of tennis player Jack Sock. So we're going to step out of the context of anti-doping and show you a quick video. Let's take a look.
How's it if you want to challenge it?
So we show you this video because Jack Sock clearly thought that it was not the right thing to do to take a point, even at a crucial point in a match. And this is just one example of an ideal athlete that is not necessarily within the context of anti-doping, but displays how the athlete lives by those values. So now I'd like you to think about the relationship between the ideal athlete. We know that some athletes dope and that there are many different reasons and circumstances that lead to such situations. It's not always clear what led to the decision and whether the athlete was fully conscious of it. What is clear, however, is that doping does not fit with the values of the spirit of sport. An athlete who intentionally uses performance-enhancing substances or methods is not behaving honestly, playing fair, showing respect for the sport, their competition, and their competitors. The values that we prioritize in sport will dictate our behaviors and our actions. So perhaps now is a good time to pause and reflect on whether we're all on the right track. Are we living by the values of the ideal athlete in our day-to-day lives, on and off the field of play? And again, thank you to everyone writing in the chat with your feedback. And yes, doping isn't fair play. Honesty is one of the values, and integrity. So thank you again for your comments. But at this point, as we self-reflect, I'd like to launch this quick and easy poll. And I would like to ask you in the audience, as an athlete, coach, administrator, medical professional, educator, parent, or other athlete support personnel, do you believe that you can influence the doping decisions of others? And the question has very simple answers. Yes, no, or I'm not sure. So I can see the answers are coming in very, very quickly. You're also writing yes in the chat. So thank you for your written answers. So do you believe, even as an athlete or other support personnel, athlete support personnel, that you can influence the decisions and behaviors of others? So over 60% of you have answered, and we can close down the poll and see the results. Indeed, 84% of you said yes, 8% said no, and 9 aren't sure. So the 84% of you, the large majority, are absolutely right. Often when we think about doping and doping-related decision-making, we consider the athlete as being autonomous and able to make a decision of their own choosing. Yet we know that values and subsequent behaviors are influenced by our environment and the people around us. The situation of an athlete and their relationship can either be preventative of doping or facilitate doping. Therefore, we all can influence doping decisions, even as athletes ourselves, for our teammates and clubmates. It is important for all of us to recognize that we have this significant role and responsibility to uphold, and that our choices and behaviors must be, of course, in line with the values of sport. So let's go back to decision-making now. Even though there are clear rules and ideals in place, and I think there's not a lot of argument about those values, we all agree that those are the values of sport. We also know that doping is not straightforward. Rarely does an athlete or an athlete support personnel make a black or white, clear yes or no decision to dope. So this is affected by our environment and our situation. And decision-making scenarios are complex and can often be related to vulnerability moments. And these exact moments can also lead to justifying doping behaviors, finding reasons for them. So let's go through some examples of vulnerability moments so that you understand what this term means. And here's one on your screen. I'm injured and I'm rapidly losing ground on my competitors. I will just take only this one drug to recover, and just once. It can also be, I've been feeling tired and burnt out lately. My doctor is giving me a pill because he says it will make me healthy. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's worth it if I can get back to full fitness. Let's see a few more examples. I'm losing my funding, and if I don't perform at this competition, if I don't perform at this competition, and this is my only way to win and keep the support that I need so much. My coach is threatening to drop me from the team, and there's a long line of other athletes fighting and ready to take my spot. Could also be a junior athlete that was always on the podium, but now in the senior ranks, they're struggling to even qualify for a competition. A few more. Somebody that joined a new club at the start of the season, and it's different there. Everyone is doping, and they're not the bad guy. They just don't want to be at a disadvantage. And finally, an athlete can be an overwhelming favorite in the media, and they don't want to let anyone down. So these are just a few of the examples where we could see and where we have seen athletes making a decision, often in difficult circumstances and during stressful periods in their career. And these generate the pressure to dope. For the athletes listening today, it's very important that you're aware of your vulnerability moments, and especially in tune with the values of the ideal athlete during those difficult times. Every athlete throughout their career, myself included, has experienced or will experience vulnerability moments. And there may be a temptation to go down an unethical road. Sometimes that means doping. For those of you listening who are coaches and other athlete support personnel, it's extremely important that you are there to support your athletes during these moments, allowing them to use healthier tools and options for recovery, supporting them to deal with pressure, and reminding them that they're not defined only by their sporting success. So no matter how difficult a decision is, remember that you always have a choice. So when you are facing a challenging moment, you can ask yourself this question: what would Jack Sock do? Okay. So being conscious of our vulnerability moments is vital because we have just talked about how they influence decision-making. So please now allow me to introduce you to Johnny, who has a dilemma. As a national record holder who values working hard, respecting others, and competing by the rules, Johnny finds himself having to make a decision. So let's watch a video about Johnny.
Johnny is the national record holder for 800 metres. He's competed at Olympics and World Championships, but has always finished outside of the medals. Now, while he's never won a medal, he's still one of the best athletes in the world and has worked hard for the past 10 years to achieve this. In this time, Johnny has realised that he often competes against other athletes who use drugs to improve their performance. He knows this because other athletes have approached him and admitted they take them and that he should too. Johnny believes that it is important he achieves success in sport without using drugs, but after the final of the World Championships, in which 3 of his competitors beat him took drugs, he is upset and annoyed at being cheated out of a medal. Johnny is considering taking drugs and has told his coach that if other athletes are doing it, he's going to do it too.
So we can see that Johnny has a dilemma. He can dope because he believes that this is the only way he can win, or he can compete clean and maybe never win a medal. So let's talk about the possible consequences of his decision. On your screen, you can see a few bullet points, but please, you can use the chat box and add your own ideas of possible consequences of doping. So first, Johnny could face sanctions, including disqualification of results. a ban and public disclosure. There are, of course, negative physical side effects as well, and psychological effects such as guilt and shame. Then there are social consequences, for example, isolation from teammates, family, and friends. And finally, Johnny could face financial consequences, such as loss of funding or sponsorship. Now, these are just a few of the possible consequences, and I would also like to remind you that many of these still apply even if an athlete never actually gets caught. And we will come back to these consequences in just a minute. And I can see here a king without a crown. Thank you for that comment. That is a very good way to describe it. Being banned from sport as well, of course, these are all the possible consequences that we'll spend a few more minutes on. But first, before we go back to these consequences, let's see what you think Johnny did. Here we can think again of the profile of the ideal athlete and some of the values that we mentioned that Johnny stands by. And the poll on your screens has appeared now. Question is simple. What do you think he did? He doped or he did not dope? And while the answers are coming in, I will also take this opportunity to say hello to a few more people that have written to us in the chat from Eswatini, Ghana, Angola, Zambia, Greece, St. Lucia, New Zealand, and Taiwan, and many other places that I have missed. My apologies if I did not give you a shout out. But thank you for being up late or being up early or joining us on your afternoon. We are thrilled to have you here. Let's give it a few more seconds to see what you have answered to this poll question. And when we reach 60%, we'll close down the poll and share the results. And thank you to someone writing, your whole life can change from you making the decision to dope, indeed. Okay. So 30% of you thought that he doped and 70% thought that he did not dope. So let's see, what did he do? Happy to say ultimately that Johnny persisted and he resisted the pressures to dope. And you can see here now we've put up his real picture. This was a real story of a real athlete. And a key factor in this was Johnny's coach, who said, "You're one of the best athletes in the world. Athletes have to take drugs just to keep up with you." So Johnny reflected on this. He weighed his options. And he reflected also on everything he would lose if he got caught. So in the end, Johnny did win a bronze medal at the 800-meter event at the 1992 Olympic Games. So it is a happy story that we share with you of a real athlete who shared his difficulties and his challenges in decision-making. And it goes to show that this can happen to anybody. And we'd like to thank the University of Birmingham for supporting this section of the webinar and for sharing Johnny's story with us. But now, let's talk about what happens when we lose focus of the spirit of sport values. And for the purpose of this section, we're going to look at consequences of doping in more detail. And we will watch short clips from the US Anti-Doping Agency, whom I'd like to also thank for the use of these videos. Both are testimonials from athletes who doped and later spoke up about their experience. The first testimonial is from Yulia Stepanova, a Russian track and field athlete. The second is from American cyclist and Tour de France rider Tyler Hamilton. As we watch, I would like to remind everyone of the courage that these athletes displayed by sharing their stories with the public. Both of these athletes have received a lot of negative attention because of their decisions to both dope and then to speak about it. So we ask you to please keep your comments respectful, as you already have, of these athletes and their experiences. So we'll start with the athlete's introduction to doping and what led to their decisions. As we watch these videos, I encourage you to think of the question on your screen And again, if you wish, you can write your comments in the chat. And the question is, what differences are there between Julia and Tyler, who doped, and Johnny, who didn't? And now let's watch our first video of Tyler's story.
And I'd finished a stage race in southern Spain, like a week-long stage race. And I was just like a starfish on my bed, collapsed. And I remember one of the team doctors came in into my room. And he was praising me about how well I had done, how much I had kind of pushed through the pain, and how impressed he was, but that I had to start taking care of my body and living a little bit more professionally, as he called it. And yeah, he was wearing like this fly fishing vest, and he reached into one of the pockets and pulled out this little red egg-shaped capsule. And he said to me, he said, "Tyler, this is for your health. It's not doping, it's for your health." It was it had testosterone in it. And yeah, that was the moment. He handed me this capsule, and that was the moment. I knew most of my teammates were doping at the time. And I thought if I said no to it, then I wouldn't be selected to ride in the Tour de France. So in a way, like the doctor coming into my room, offering me this little red egg-shaped testosterone pill, in a way that was almost introducing me to the A team, you know. And for me, I felt like that was a big opportunity that was my chance to, you know, ride in the Tour. And it showed that they had faith in me, and that they thought I had a future in the sport.
When I was 20 years old, I was sick, and I spent 3 months in hospital. And I wanted to continue to run, but doctor said it's better for me to stop running, because my body needs to have power to kind of fight with this sickness. But I wanted to continue to run because I like it. And my coach asked my doctor about using some prohibited substances. And doctor said, yes, probably it should help. I just was learning from other athletes, from my coach, and they was talking about doping like it's like a normal way to prepare. It's like vitamins for athletes. And they like explained me all adults, athletes, they use it. Like we cannot run without this. And after that, my coach decided to start giving me prohibited substances.
Okay, so now we'll put the question that we started with back on your screen. And what is the difference between Tyler and Julia and Johnny? And what was the difference that made them lead to certain decisions? Well, Johnny is more like the ideal athlete, as Johnny made a decision in line with the values of the spirit of sport. Julia and Tyler faced pressure from their entourage and the environment which influenced their decision making. And I can see here somebody wrote external influences, and their coaches failed for those athletes, and absolutely this is the environment that led to their decision making. So this shows two different types of success in sport underpinned by different values. As an athlete or athlete support personnel, your approach can be to win at all costs, or to allow your athletes to be the best they can be. And I think that gives us a great example. So thank you very much to everyone writing in your feedback. It is much appreciated, and I'm trying to read all the messages here. And they were both aware, of course, and received different influences. But to conclude this section of the webinar, I will leave you again with a question of self-reflection. What type of athlete would you like to be? And which type of athlete would you like to support? And now let's move on to talking about some of the other consequences of doping. As we already saw, there are many consequences which we addressed a few minutes ago. Consequences are not just a result of an athlete being caught. I will not go through them one by one. Rather, we'll continue to listen to the athlete's perspective over the next few minutes and hear how doping has affected them. So if we move on to the next video, I do want to quickly mention sanctions. If we don't mind going to the next slide, and we can look at sanctions, which is also the next slide. These are consequences of doping from the perspective of anti-doping rules. As you will recall from our first session of the series, there are 11 anti-doping rule violations. There are many different types of sanctions and lengths of bans that are determined during the results management process. And these are based on many factors. Therefore, we cannot present the exact sanctions or lengths of ban in a session like today's webinar. But we're certainly happy to answer questions if you have any. But now the first consequence that we'll cover in more detail is physical health. For this, again, we'll go back to Tyler and Julia and we'll watch another 2 videos. So let's take a look at these.
In 2004, I was in the middle of the Tour de France. I did a transfusion. I'd given blood, weeks before, and it was getting reinfused back into me. And I think the red blood cells had gone bad, and I had a bad reaction to it. My urine was like black with dead red blood cells. I got like a fever. I didn't know if I was, could die from that, or sure enough, from the research that I've found out that, yeah, it could have been really bad. Luckily, the fever didn't get any worse. And, I told the team doctor about it, and he watched over me, but luckily it passed. But I remember thinking to myself, like, what am I doing? What am I doing? This is a crazy world.
It was in 2012 years, and it was one accident. I was injured, and my coach offered me to do some infusions with creatinophosphate and midocalm, and I did it. And few seconds after, when it was done, my heart started to beat rapidly, and I was scared that I can die. And after that, I was questioning. And that moment when it happened, I was just kind of lay down and just told myself, if I will be alive, I will never again just put any needles in my body, just take anything in my body, because I don't want to die.
So some powerful testimonials from these athletes and the physical effects of doping that they experienced. And after watching these 2 videos, it's important to remember that substances and methods get added to the prohibited list, not just because they enhance sport performance, but also they may represent an actual or real risk for athletes and their health. And this is what we saw with both Julia and Tyler. What's even more important to note is that doping is often done in secrecy, and unfortunately by those who do not have the qualification or the knowledge required to keep the athletes safe. So in addition to administering drugs that are already harmful to the athlete's health, this is often done in unsanitary conditions, in wrong doses, or without proper monitoring or follow-up on athletes' health. Now, when it comes to consequences of doping, mental health is just as important as physical health. And this is what we'll see from the next video of Tyler.
Cycling all of a sudden became different. It was more about results. I felt more like a number. The numbers that I produced on the bike, you have all this data that you can record while you're cycling. Those numbers became kind of like whether I was happy or not. after the 2003 season, which was probably my most successful season, on record. Had great results, had a big Tour de France. I got back stateside after the season was over. It was in my off season, and I just realized I was having a hard time just getting out of bed. No motivation. I mean, I thought about suicide. I drank to just check out at some points. Pretty much every night, if not every night, at least every other night, I'd wake up usually between 2 and 3 in the morning and just sit there for 45 minutes and stare at the ceiling. Yeah, I called them committee meetings, and just kind of think about what I was up to and the consequences, and if it all went bad, how ugly that was going to look.
Talking about his mental health in the situation. But I would now like to cover some other long-term effects for the athlete and for the others. So with this final video from Julia, she will explain some of the long-term effects that she has experienced. Let's take a look.
When I was banned, it was like last row. And after that, I decided, okay, I need to do something right now. And I need not listen anymore people around me and just don't believe them because they lie to me. I believe them, and they don't care about me. They don't care about my health. I have 20 times more ferritin, and they don't care. They care only about results, about money, and about medals. I can say if you cheat, you would never be a real champion, because with all your life, very deep inside of you, you will be feeling like you're a cheater, not a real champion.
To an earlier comment from the chat, a king or a queen without a crown. Another long-term effect is the ongoing public perception and reaction to an athlete who has been sanctioned for doping, which, if you remember, relates to something that influenced Johnny's decision-making. Knowing that even if he doped only once, if he had been caught, every performance and every result from the past would have been tainted. So here's Justin Gatlin, who has been sanctioned for doping twice before winning the 100 meters at the World Championships, where subsequently he was booed during his medal ceremony. And that should be the highlight of an athlete's career, standing on top of the podium. And that was tainted by his previous sanction. Now, a quote from an Australian newspaper explains it very well. Even if he can be forgiven for his past mistakes, he can never be held up as a hero, and sport needs heroes to survive. Now, again, when we think about consequences and effects of doping, we often consider only the effects on the person who doped. However, it's important to remember that doping, of course, also affects others. So here, this is the effect on teammates. Another real-life example where an athlete who was sanctioned for doping was a member of a relay team. In the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, a member of this relay team tested positive for a prohibited substance, and their entire team was disqualified and had to return their Olympic medals. One of the team members has spoken out as being heartbroken at having a medal taken away after having worked so hard to win it at the sport's pinnacle event of their career. Doping can also have a significant impact on athletes' family and friends. Dwayne Chambers, who was sanctioned for doping, was interviewed about the impact on his children. Telling his children was very difficult, and they didn't understand. It will come up again, he knows, and there will be instances in their life when they will get pulled up and picked up because of it, picked on. They will have to be very careful how they react to people and their lives will be more hard because of their father's history. Now, summing up, regarding the consequences of doping, there's so much unknown. We don't know how many years it will take for the physical effects to reverse or whether damage is permanent. We don't know the extent of the effect of doping on fellow athletes because we don't hear stories of the person who didn't make the team or the World Championships or a major event and retired. And ultimately, we don't know what doping will do to our sports and the future survival, as some sports have already lost their Olympic quota. So let's take a look at one final video about speaking out from Tyler before I hand it over to Kelsey.
And I didn't want to tell the truth. I really didn't. I thought, I felt like I was 10 years too late to tell the truth. But being forced to go in and testify in front of the grand jury, it was like, I felt like that all of a sudden was my moment. And it was like I had had all this like guilt like built up that I didn't even know how deep it went. And then finally I got there in front of the grand jury. Maybe the first 10 or 15 minutes it was a little bit hard, but then it was just like, whew, and it just came out, and it felt, for as hard as it felt also just wonderful. And here we go. Here's the truth. And it's not pretty. It's really ugly. I'm ashamed about it. I'm going to disappoint a lot of people with this information, but it's the truth. And it was at that moment I was like, wow, I've been like protecting this culture, this omerta, trying to be like the good old fraternity mate, like not telling the secrets. And then I realized, wow, what is just a ugly situation this has been, and ugly situation we all went through. So from that moment on, really, being in that Los Angeles courtroom, I came out of there and I kind of had a new perspective on what I was going to do with my life, and hiding the truth was not included in that anymore.
So Tyler's last testimonial is a perfect transition for us to the topic of speaking up. And here's where I'd like to welcome back Dr. Kelsey Erickson to deliver this part. So Kelsey, I think everyone's heard me talking for way too long. I will now hand over the presentation to you to talk about speaking up. So thank you once again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Olya, and happy to have a chance to talk about this. So just to give a little context as to why I am here and why I am speaking about this topic. My PhD research looked at the complexity of whistleblowing on doping. And what Tyler talked about in that last video is his decision, and maybe not so much a decision initially, as he was kind of forced to come forward with this information, but the freedom that came to him as he spoke up about his relationship with doping. And so one of the things that we're hearing more about in the anti-doping community or the clean sport community is how powerful whistleblowing and ultimately investigations are for identifying and exposing doping in sport. And when I started looking at this topic, it seemed to me like a really simple process. I mean, essentially, if you are an athlete that values clean sport or an athlete support personnel that values clean sport, and you become aware of someone's doping, then naturally you would report it because you don't want there to be doping in sport. But like most things in life, it's not necessarily quite as simple as that. And so in the research that I conducted, what we found is that whistleblowing presents a true moral dilemma. And what that means is when somebody becomes aware of doping, they have two equally valid and demanding moral options. As you see here in this image, on the one hand, they can report doping in order to protect clean sport, or they can keep quiet in order to protect the reputation and well-being of the athlete or athletes that are doping. And why that might be something an athlete considers is they don't necessarily want to feel responsible for ending someone's career. So you can see that it's not necessarily a super simple choice in every situation. And one thing to bear in mind here is that as someone who has information about doping, you most likely didn't go searching for that information. So once you know about doping or suspect doping, you can't unknow it. Once you know you're in that situation, and no matter what you decide to do, you're gonna be involved. And so what we want to do as those that are working in sport is make it so that the decision is to report, and we're making it as easy as possible for you to do that. So if we go to the next slides, what we started with this research around looking at kind of, once we know that there's this complexity, like what actually is that process that people go through? And is it as straightforward as just, I think, you know, or I know that someone's doping, I report it and I move on with my life? And what we found is that it's not quite that simple. So we're gonna watch, if we go to the next slide, what we found is that really there's kind of 3 steps to this process. And the research that we did, I actually spoke to individuals who had blown the whistle on doping. So 3 individuals who had actually reported doping. It was not their own doping behavior. So unlike Tyler, who essentially reported his own doping behavior along with others, these individuals that I interviewed were aware of others' doping behaviors. And what I did is combine their 3 experiences into one. So what we're going to talk about and watch is a video that is actors actually playing the role of 3 individuals' experiences told from the perspective of 1 individual. And the similarity across the 3 whistleblowers was that they kind of went through this process that we see here. The first step in reporting doping is you have to determine whether or not what you witnessed is doping. And the reality is, it's not usually that you just kind of walk in and see someone using a banned substance or method that's labeled and that you know for sure is a banned substance or method. It's usually a little more nuanced than that. So we're going to watch the first stage of this video, and it really highlights this idea of, actually, it can be kind of difficult to determine whether or not what you saw or experienced was doping.
Whistleblowers actually coming to terms with what you saw or experienced. It seems like a really simple thing to do, but it took me, others I know, months to actually come to terms with, oh yeah, that was shitty. You know, that broke some rules, or most likely broke some rules.
Looking back now, there was a lot of earlier signs. A lot of small things that just kept adding up. But I literally would have never put it down to that. Most of the times, it's not I saw some guy injecting testosterone. He has the picture and video of it. He has everything. It's not black and white like that. And I think acknowledging that is really important. Step 1 is coming to terms with the fact of what you saw was wrong.
All right, so you'll notice there that they talk about this idea of kind of realizing that what you've witnessed is doping. And one thing that highlights is, and why, you know, webinars such as this is so important, is that you as athletes and athlete support personnel have an obligation to make sure you know the anti-doping rules and what is a banned substance and what is a banned method, so that you are able to identify if someone is or likely is using a banned substance or method, so you know what to report. So that's an important first step, is having that anti-doping knowledge, but then also knowing that you don't have to know 100% that someone is doping to report it. If you suspect it, you should report it, and then let the authorities, you know, at the anti-doping organization or wherever you report it, take responsibility for confirming that indeed that is what happened. So the first step is to determine that what you saw or witnessed was actually likely a anti-doping rule violation. The next step then is, so now you know, you have this awareness, so what do you do next? The next step is you have to actively decide to report it. So we'll watch another clip that highlights this.
I guess getting to that point of stepping forward, the threshold I crossed was, okay, I've just got to get this off my chest. I'm going to send an anonymous tip to the NATO, and then whatever, someone knows something. So I sent an email on their tip line without any name at all. Just sent it on the ether and then waited a week or so and thought, this sucks. I don't know if anything's happened to it. So the next step was, okay, I'm going to send it and attach my email address to it. And then each step requires another internal turmoil to go through. So I sent that out there, and then I got a reply saying, we'd love to talk to you.
So what this one highlights is you've got to know what to do with that information. And it is a decision, that decision to actually go forward and report. And that's one of the things that we're seeing in anti-doping is that we have more and more platforms and places for individuals to be able to report information. And we want to make sure that every one of you has the knowledge and awareness of where it is appropriate to make those reports. So ultimately deciding that you're going to do something with that information. And then the final step in this process, and an important one, is recognizing that once you make that report, it doesn't necessarily mean that you just suddenly move on. There can be consequences and outcomes of that report that it's helpful to be prepared for, but also know that there's resources that are available to help support you in that aftermath. So we'll watch this video that kind of highlights some of these outcomes of reporting.
I don't even know how to describe it.
Let's put it this way. I wouldn't even want people I don't like to go through some of the shit I went through.
And it's changed everything about my life.
I think the hardest part for me is going through all the comments and things on the media pages and seeing some of the stuff people say.
And when I'm getting harassed on social media or whatever, it's just me. It's not me and 5 other people. It's just me. I just feel like I'm standing alone.
Coming forward has changed how people perceive me and who wants to work with me. I think it was the fact that there was so much risk associated with me. No one wants drama, right? And unfortunately, I am labeled drama.
So one thing I want to point out here is that the individuals in this research reported doping years ago. And a positive change that we've seen in recent years is much more appreciation and respect for individuals who have the courage to come forward and report information. And so that would be something that I would encourage each of you to be aware of, is how are you responding to individuals that have the courage to report doping behaviors? And hopefully, if you are someone that values clean sport and fair competition, you are recognizing those individuals for their courage and you're celebrating them rather than discouraging them or condemning them. And that is one thing that we've also seen change in the WADA code, is there's now an anti-doping rule violation for retaliation against whistleblowers. And that is specifically so that we can protect them and make sure that we are celebrating and thanking them for having the courage to come forward. So I'll hand it back to Olya here, and she's going to talk about one of the resources that is available for reporting doping. I would encourage each of you in your respective international federations and your respective international locations to take a few minutes following this presentation and do a little bit of research to find out what are the potential options that you have for reporting doping, because there might be, and very likely is, multiple, whether that's through the World Anti-Doping Agency or the ITA, or even through your actual international federation. So Olya, back to you.
Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you very much for the presentation. If you want to stay with us on camera, that would be great. We only have a few minutes left, so I'll get to the questions as quickly as possible. And you can see that the ITA has our own platform called Reveal, and the address is there on your screen, reveal.sport. Again, you have many options here. If you just want to speak to someone and not take it any further, you can. If you want to keep it anonymous, you can. There's a secure inbox. You can report in any language of your choice, and the platform itself is also available in multiple languages for you to navigate. So it is certainly a useful tool from the ITA, but like Kelsey said, there's a wealth of other resources. So if you prefer to use a national resource or a resource of your sport federation, you are more than welcome to do so as well. But this is available to you, no matter where you come from and what sport you represent, to contact us if you just want to speak confidentially, or if you have something to report, or if you have any questions. Okay, so the next slide will show you the resources that you will receive by email, the things that we've mentioned today, the videos that we've used, and some of the research references. So feel free to look these up if you wish. Now, we might be just a minute or two over time, but I do want to address some questions with you, Kelsey. And so I'll go to the Q&A and see what we have. Sanogo has asked a few questions. Maybe we can take the first one. Is how do you evaluate the state of a doper? We don't know if it's mental state or physical state, but maybe you can offer some feedback. And how do you manage or handle or deal with doping? So it's quite a big question, but Kelsey, do you have any thoughts?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. How do you evaluate the state of a doper? Is that before they dope or after?
So maybe Sanogo, if you want to email us, we'll put our email address on the screen. So if you want to send us a bit more detail for your question, we'll be sure to get back to you. It's quite a broad question indeed. Let's try another one. There's also another question from Sanogo, but I encourage you to put them all in an email. We will get back to you. And we're sorry we weren't able to give you an immediate response here live. But let's try Marco's question perhaps. Do you think that working on athletes and athlete support personnel aged above 25 years old about values of clean sport is useful, or is it worth especially for children and youth athletes?
That's a great question. I think the earlier we can start, the better. I mean, I certainly think that over 25 is better than nothing, but definitely the earlier we can start working with individuals, the better. The earlier we can shape their attitudes and behaviors and values, the more likely they are to maintain those when they face difficult situations. So I would say ideally we start as young as possible, but it's better, something's better than nothing. And so if we didn't reach them before 25, it's still worth engaging with them 25 plus.
Thank you, Kelsey. And then to the last comment here from Juan, who is saying that he'd like to help the athlete who is fighting to get the medals. And I don't know if it's referring to a medal reallocation perhaps, but Juan, if you want to also send us a note and tell us more about your situation, we'll be happy to follow up. And indeed, thank you for fighting for clean athletes, Juan. Okay, great. Kelsey, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our session today. For anyone who still has questions for us, you can email us at education@ita.sport. We'll put the email address on the screen for you to see. And our last webinar will take place at 2 p.m. on Thursday, July 28th. the topic is out of competition testing, and that will wrap up our IF series, for which, of course, you will receive a certificate for attending all 5 sessions. So, a reminder, please fill out the survey after the webinar. It will come to you automatically and in the email. You will receive a copy of the slides, and later this summer, you will receive your certificates as well. So Kelsey, thank you so much for being a part of our session. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone in all different parts of the world and different time zones for joining us today. I wish you a great rest of your day, your evening, or a good morning, and see you soon.